Right. Hello and welcome to my seminar, Visual Effects with Quartz Composer. My name is Anatol Ulrich, or Aceras. I'm supposed to move to the left. Okay, I'm the guy responsible for the network here, so if anything fails, it's always my fault. And also, you will be hearing from me about this cool, but in my opinion, a bit too unknown technology from Apple, which is called Quartz Composer. And what you can do with it, and why it's cool, and why it's not cool as well. So first, I'm going to talk a bit about how I came to use it and what I did with it. And then actually introduce Quartz Composer itself in detail. After that, I will show what or how you can extend it, which is in part quite interesting because you have to do a bit of reverse engineering and use undocumented features and stuff like this. So that's probably something sceners like to do. Show a few examples of my work, and in the end, there will be time for questions. Small apology, this is not going to be as smooth as I planned it to be because it's absolutely impossible for me to sit there and control things while viewing the big screen. So I had to move everything to one screen and synchronize my laptop's content with the big screen content. And so I am running on lower resolution than I intended to, and so on and so on. So if there are any glitches, my apologies. Right, we already had this introductional part. Maybe we hadn't. A bit more about how I came to use Quartz Composer. I started VJing with a friend of mine, and we initially developed our own tool, but quickly discovered it was a lot of work, and it didn't go anywhere. We had some small stuff running. It could play animation loops on, I think, only on macOS. Initially, we intended it to be cross-platform. But we really got nowhere because you get caught up in a lot of details and stuff. And so the whole VJ idea with this friend of mine went dormant for, I don't know, maybe half a year. And then one evening he told me, hey, look what I found, check this out, this is pretty cool. And he showed me Quartz Composer, and I was like, you're right, this is pretty cool. And since this evening where we hacked on it more or less until 8 a.m., I'm using Quartz Composer for VJ gigs. And I'm still always changing and improving my VJ tool in Quartz Composer, so it's not nearly finished, but maybe in the end I can get something running with it and show you the tool itself, but don't expect too much. Then, after I played around with it, I subscribed to the developer mailing list, and one day there popped up a job listing from a company in London who were seeking people with Quartz Composer experience, and I thought to myself, hey, why not? Let's just send in my stuff. And they wanted to employ me, and it turned out that in the end, we used Quartz Composer to drive a live TV show in Britain, which was called the BBC One Show. And what we did there was use Quartz Composer to display text messages, I think also MMS messages, and all this stuff you usually see in TV shows where you see the moderator's name or what's currently on, like all these boxes. We used it as a live TV composition tool, which is usually done by hardware tools like Pixel Powers Clarity machines. And we were able to offer the BBC the same performance, or in some cases also more features at a very low price, because Quartz Composer and the software we developed with it runs just on commodity Apple hardware. And I think nowadays you can install OS X on pretty much any Intel machine, so it would run on regular PCs. So there were no huge hardware machines to be bought and stuff like this. And we could extend it for BBC in whatever way we like. By the way, if you're wondering what this is my time cube. This is just the time I have left. So this is from my own curiosity and to see for myself where I am standing with the time and stuff. So where was I? I was in Britain doing this live show, and we also put our stuff on BBC big screens, which is a quite funny thing. The BBC just bought a lot of huge LCD displays and put them up in public places, and found out they had no stuff to put on them. And there we came in and did some stuff with these. Yeah, that was basically what I did with Quartz Composer commercially. and I think that's enough introduction. So what actually is Quartz Composer? And it's kind of a front end to technology deeply embedded within Apple's operating system. It's actually a part of QuickTime. So you can use Quartz Composer anywhere. You can use QuickTime, which means you can use it on icons. You can use it in any part of a GUI interface. If I actually have some... I'm running out of space here, which is really bad, because I wanted to go to the Quicksilver help menu. No, actually, about. What you see here, the QS, that's a bit animated. It's very subtle, but that actually is a Quartz composition embedded in a regular Mac OS window. So you can use it pretty much anywhere in the operating system. You can develop your own applications with it. But there is this program called Quartz Composer you use to create Quartz compositions. Sorry. And this is kind of the editing environment for those composition files you can then use elsewhere. And it looks like this. This is a node-based visual programming language. Some of you might know Max MSP or Buzz or VVVV or stuff like this. It's the same idea. You've got nodes and you create connections between them. And I'm not going to create any new connections because this is actually the composition that you see running here. And I'm not going to change it because every time I try to change and fix something live, it totally breaks and I'm not able to rescue anything. So I'm just going to leave this one alone. But I'm going to show you some stuff you can do. Now I create a new composition. Initially, this is pretty empty and filled with a strange checkboard, which means it's probably a good idea to start with a clear. It's a pretty boring patch, but this just ensures that if you embed your Quartz composition somewhere else, you don't get any ugly artifacts because parts of the frame buffer have not been cleared between frames. And it actually doesn't show up in Quartz Composer, but if you do it in some other application, and you don't have a clear patch, and you don't have something that redraws the full screen, like you have something that creates a background, like a gradient patch. If you have a gradient that fills the whole screen, you don't need a clear patch. So we can also start with a gradient. And put something more interesting in there. There is actually a lot of vendor-supplied nodes, and there is stuff like color overlay. I don't know how to call these actually. It's it's different blend modes like you know from Photoshop, but these all run on the GPU. This is a cool thing about Quartz Composer. It's basically free. Whatever you do in image manipulation, it's not totally free, but it's a lot faster than if you would have to do it on the CPU. So if you just have two images and want to blend one another with a dodge blend mode, let me try to find some. I haven't prepared for this part, but let's just use this. I tried to do a VJ gig on Breakpoint last year, but I ran out of time, of course, and also I was too sick to do it. But I'm just gonna use some BBC images here and violate every copyright they might have. Blend those two onto another and then slap it onto a billboard, which is then gonna look like this. You can't see anything because we don't have a viewer. Pretty boring image because color dodge is probably not the best blend mode there is for these two images. Let me try some other. I haven't prepared anything for this part. So I'm just going to improvise and think of something. Exclusion. Exclusion is going to give us something where you can see both images that I'm pretty sure of. Viewer. All right. So there's two images and they are blended on top of another with exclusion blend mode. Right. So you have these different blend modes. Pretty static so far. Let's do some animation. For animation, you've got low frequency oscillators, interpolation, and some other stuff. I mostly use interpolation. I hardly use LFOs at all, but there's no good reason not to use them. It's just that, I don't know. So let's increase the amplitude, because I'm going to do a rotation, and everything that's got to do with angles in Quartz Composer is degrees and not radians, so we have to use 360 of them. I'm just going to connect it to the rotation input port here, and whoa, our LFO rotates our newly created compose image. Right. What else can I do? I can use this interpolation, which is, you can actually tweak the parameters, so an interpolation is identical to an LFO, which is probably the reason I hardly use the LFO. If you just use sinusoidal interpolation, I'm pretty sure it's equal to a sinus LFO, but the LFO has got some other modes, and those are actually useful. However, I'm just going to use a linear interpolation now and loop it between, let's use -1 and 1, and connect it to the X position. Right. So this is a beautiful, silly animation running smoothly on our GPU. This is all OpenGL textures and OpenGL rotation. Nothing has to be composed on the CPU, which is pretty nice, I think. There's actually a sister application to Quartz Composer, which is called Core Image Funhouse. I don't know if it's installed on this machine. It is. It's basically let's call it a very, very reduced version of Photoshop, where you can just stack images onto another and do all stuff like Gaussian blur or zoom blur and stuff like this, which is pretty funny. And yeah, also everything here runs on the GPU. What you saw here in the operator stack were effects that you can also use in Quartz Composer. So sometimes it might be easier to try stuff out in Core Image Funhouse, and then after you decided on an operator stack and on your parameters, you recreate it in Quartz Composer. And I just used the crystallize effect. It's here as well. I will just put it up here and remove the exclusion blend mode stuff, and it will look like this. Right, it's crystallized and nobody can see anything because it's moving too fast. What else can you do? There's, as I said earlier, a lot of patches. They're sometimes called patches, and sometimes, I don't know, I tend to call them nodes. There is this one patch that you will have to use very often, and it feels really retarded, because this is how you add two numbers, and maybe you multiply them by some other number, and you can add another operator and another operand, and I don't know, to me it feels kind of wrong to click my mathematical operators together, which is why math often annoys me. However, I will get back to this very often, but there's a private or hidden patch that's much more convenient. If you have got a complex formula you want to enter, you just type it in, and it will automatically, I think, create the correct input ports. Right. Let me just test if I can use arbitrary letters here. Oh, I can. This is nice. So if you've got some calculations to do, don't rely on the math patch, because it makes you want to poke your eyes out. Remember how to enable private patches and use mathematical expression. Is there something else which is interesting? Also, where am I here? Yes. Of course, loading images is fun and interesting, but also maybe a bit static. So I can also use camera input, and we should be able to see that. Right. This is a bit slower now, I think, because the FireWire connection has to pull all these bytes coming from the camera onto the GPU. But if I would not use this crystallized thing, it will be fast, right? There is, I think, some hack they're using. So if you don't manipulate a camera input image, it does not have to be copied around and can be used more or less directly. And if I'm just going to stop this rotation and reset it to 0, we might be able to see something. Hello, audience. I'm just going to make it larger. I don't know why the billboard defaults to width 1, which is really annoying because width 2 would be the complete width of the screen or the composition. Right, so there you are. You can also use movies. You can load any QuickTime movie, which in the default Apple stock vanilla installation means pretty much nothing except for QuickTime encoded movies. But there is this package called Parian, which is, I think, a port of FFD show to macOS, and then you can just load any movie that is that you can load with FFD show. No, I did not want to go into that directory, so let's just load some demo video I re-encoded earlier. I did not re-encode it to make it loadable, but to make it fast, because right, this should be Chaos Theory, which, you know, begins in black. Right, there it is. You will also notice there is no sound. 2 reasons for that. First, an obvious reason, my laptop's output port is not connected to any of the speakers, but also Quartz Composer. This is one of the bigger drawbacks, and its default stock configuration does not support sound. So you have to hack your way around that. And my colleagues in London did something, but I don't know how far they came. But the one who did the major part of the programming always kept telling me, don't use it, it's unstable and broken and will desync and stuff. So it's probably not in a good shape. However, in theory, it is possible to load movies with sound. Just make this a bit slower so it would not annoy us too much. Right, there's still, as you can see, I had closed the viewer window and everything got reset to 0. For example, the movie's timeline position. If you close a viewer window, stuff will get reset to its default value, and it's not always obvious what this default value is. But usually it means every timeline is going to be reset to 0, and probably some other stuff. For example, JavaScript nodes, which I have not talked about yet, but we'll talk about a lot, are going to reinitialize themselves. Since I've mentioned them right now, JavaScript nodes are pretty cool because they enable you to, in theory, extend Quartz Composer any way you like. This is just a... I don't know, can you even read this? I think it might be a bit too small. What about the back rows? It's fine? That's good. It's not going to be readable on the recording probably, but since you're all here, you won't care. This is, as the comments say, the default simple script that just adds 2 values. But you can create JavaScript functions and classes and do some pretty complicated and interesting stuff in there. Yes, but more about that later. What else is there? There is support for various input devices. Let me just check my time. Oh, I'm a bit too slow with my talk, so I have to speed it up maybe a little. There is support for input devices like mouse, so you can use the X value, the Y value, left button, and Apple actually realized there is a right button, but you will notice there is no wheel on this node, and yes, I have not found a way to use the mouse wheel in Quartz Composer, but at least there is a right button, which is nice. There is also a support for trackball, which I've never used because I don't own one, but oh, actually, this is not for hardware trackballs. This is to simulate a trackball. Right here it says it encloses its subpatches in a virtual trackball. So you can connect it to whatever you like. You can use the X of the mouse to do this and have a environment which you can rotate in. Let me just try that out. Yeah, Quartz Composer is hierarchical, so you have patches and sub-patches. And there are some things that are inherited, for example, the timeline. So by default, a patch has a patch timeline, but you can also set the time base to external. Parent, which is the default, means inherited. Local is just a local timeline. I have never used it, but it probably means that it will always use the patch time. I don't know. DK, have you done this? Have you done this? Use local time? Okay, so no idea, but I suppose it means do not inherit whatever time your parent uses. Use your local time. I mean, it says local. But the thing I use most often is external patch time. So I can do whatever I like. For example, I connect the LFO to the interpolation's patch time, which means the patch time itself is going to warp up and down because the LFO is a sinus. But I will show an example of this later. Where was I? Yes, everything is hierarchical, so this means everything inside this trackball is going to be influenced by the trackball's rotation. And everything inside this lighting environment, which I create, is going to be influenced by these lighting parameters. So if I put a cube inside a lighting inside a trackball, and maybe make it a bit smaller because I don't like huge cubes. Erase. Let's just try this out. In theory, I should have a rotated lighted cube now. Oh my god, what is this? This is the movie from before, and probably this is too low because, as I mentioned earlier, everything which has to do with angles in Quartz Composer is degree based. So I'm just gonna multiply it by 360 here, and we might be able to see something. Everything you see here is improvised in real time, so it's probably gonna break again, and I'm gonna waste my whole time to it works. Right, so I'm inside a trackball, and yes, because since I'm rotating the environment and not the cube itself, you're not going to see some interesting rotation. But yes, you just saw a rotated cube, which was rotated by the mouse. What else is there apart from mouse and yes, that's the only thing I showed. There is support for tablets. And you can even read the pressure, but I don't have a tablet with me, so I can't show anything with a tablet. But I do have a MIDI keyboard with me, which enables me to do something with that. And this is pretty nice because you have all these knobs, and you can use it to twist and tweak parameters in real time, and show some effects when you hit that note or that one, and yeah, whatever your MIDI controller can do, Quartz Composer can read out. This is also a pain in the ass because you have to select what you want to read, and this is a huge drop-down list, and you can always only select a single element, and you have to do it again and again and again. And the fun part is there's no way to find out what this knob corresponds to in this list. So I spent a lot of time figuring that out, and I put it in a text file, and I copied it to 1,000 places because I don't want to do this ever again. But I got it all figured out for you, and we will take a look at that later. Speaking of later, where am I with the time? No, this is wrong. Whatever that was. Right. You can also read external data. There is... for no good reason, there are two RSS nodes. One of them is private, which means it's hidden by default, and one is RSS feed. I don't know, if you have ever been to a Apple store, there is this, I don't think they put it up anymore, but they used to have this screensaver running with the latest headlines from apple.com or whatever, and it used Quartz Composer and this RSS feed as a data source. You can also download images from the internet, which is not going to work here because although we do have internet, I forgot to bring my LAN cable, and so I can't use the wireless LAN bridge to the LAN here I set up myself. So nothing for me here, but yeah, this image downloader, you just give it a URL, whatever, and you get a image and also a done signal, and the download is done. This does not work at all because the image downloader uses a cache, and if you enable it, you never get a done signal. So I wrote a replacement. If you see this BB in front of the nodes stands for best before. That was the company I was working with in London. What else is there? You can pull in everything from a folder, images from a local folder. At best before, we also wrote a XML patch, which can read arbitrary XML data and transform it into a data structure Quartz Composer can understand. Speaking of structures, this is an important part. Quartz Composer basically knows about dictionaries and arrays. And arrays are just structures you put in here. Let's just assume this is a structure. Quartz Composer enables you or allows you to connect pretty much anything to anything as long as it's not a loop. I will get back to this later. So I can say I want the first element of this array. And let's say the first element is actually a dictionary. Then I connect it to a key member node and say I want to have the member with the key. And whatever comes out there would go in here, but since I just created a nonsense connection, this is not going to work. This corresponds to JavaScript again. If I set the output to be something like an array, and the fourth element would be a dictionary then. And of course, you can arbitrarily nest this stuff, so you can have arrays, of dictionaries, and so on. You get the idea. Right, we were speaking of JavaScript, and this brings me to my next point. If you use the JavaScript patch, it will annoy you, because there's no obvious way to store values between iterations. So this JavaScript patch is normally stateless, and this seriously inhibits what you can do with it, because sometimes you need to store values and refer to them in a later iteration. Yes, everything in a Quartz composition is called once per iteration unless it's not necessary. So this means basically if the input of a patch changes, it is going to recalculate whatever is in there. This means that if I have an image connected to a very expensive filter chain and I don't change the image, there is no recalculation going on. I can just use the output image and don't care about how expensive the filter chain was. As long as the image doesn't change, everything is fine. Yes, I mentioned that the JavaScript patch is initially stateless. Now, one might get the idea to use a standard JavaScript pattern and just create a function called SomeObject, and inside it refer to self, and later just create this and have a constructor and stuff like this. I'm not going to type it out because it's going to take up too much time. However, my point is this will crash. Sooner or later this will crash. So what you do instead is not refer to self but to object. This works fine. This is one of the small hacks you have to use in Quartz Composer. Just store everything you need stateful in object, never in self. There is some other problem. You need to initialize your objects. So you have to have a constructor that is called exactly once. So this means you have to do something like this. If not object initialized, then first set object initialized to true, and then do whatever you like to do in your constructor. However, we found out that this is not being called exactly once. This might be called 0 times or 2 times, or stuff like this. So nowadays, I use a different approach. I just connect the patch time to a JavaScript node. And where is it? Here. And just refer to this. Sometimes it's acting up. So I say now is the first input port. And do something like if now is smaller than 1 second or something like this. And don't use this initialize pattern at all. I'm just going to do my initialization over and over again in the first second of the composition and have to live with the fact that in the first second it will be unusable, but after that it's going to be stable. And this is something which you will probably not get if you use this initialized Boolean bridge over constructor calling. If anyone finds a better pattern for Quartz Composer usage, I would be happy to hear about it, because I'm not really glad with my current approach, but it's the best that I came up with. JavaScript, however, has some limitations. You can use it to overcome some limitations of stock Quartz Composer patches. For example, there is this particle system renderer, and it just gives you a bunch of particles. We don't have an image connected to it right now, which makes it look boring. Now we have. Wonderful. You can tweak this particle system in a lot of ways and make it look pretty. However, you saw I can only connect one image, which means the whole particle system always uses the same image, and this is not so nice. So I one day wrote a replacement in JavaScript, which works fine for up to, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 particles. But after that, it's just too slow. So what do? You search around the internet, find out that some people have found ways to create new patches. I already talked about these before once, so obviously we have found that out too. And you can do some pretty interesting stuff. And the nice thing is, it's going to be really fast, because you will have, you can use Objective-C or write them in C or whatever. And for example, this is a custom patch that, what does it actually do? It's probably, if you some of you recognize the class names, I was too lazy to change them. They're from an example of Quartz Composer Japan group. But this actually, I think, draws a pie chart or something, which we needed for the BBC One show. So you just can create your custom OpenGL extensions in Objective-C or Plain C or whatever you like. And you're fine, and you have great speed once again, because you don't have to evaluate the JavaScript. I think the JavaScript patch in Quartz Composer does not even use just-in-time compilations, so it's really bad. There are some other stuff you can do. This OpenGL stuff is derived from a 3D Studio loader, which I think it doesn't work anymore because of Endian issues and stuff. But basically, you can do any OpenGL stuff you like, but there are more interesting things to find if you use a nice utility called class dump, which generates a huge dump of all the object information available in a binary, and gives us this really huge file. It's about 6,200 lines, and tells us about all the classes and interfaces that Quartz Composer uses. Quartz Composer is the reverse engineer stream, or one of them. And there are many interesting things to find. You see how patches use, what are they called? Interface builder files, NIP files, so you can write your own custom interface here. For example, the video input uses a custom interface file here, so you can set video options. And we also have some patches, I think, where I used a custom interface file, but I don't remember which one, and it's not that interesting. But that's just one of the options I found out that are possible if you just inspect this QC classes file and read up on it a lot. And we also used it to overcome one of the more serious limitations of Quartz Composer, which is you cannot create cycles by default. And this can be really annoying. For example, if you want to display text of varying lengths, yeah, DK knows what I'm talking about, and you just want to change to the next text block after the first has been displayed completely, you more or less need a cycle unless you calculate the length of the display outside of Quartz Composer, but that makes Quartz Composer very inflexible. So I poked around a bit in Quartz Composer with something called fscript anywhere, which is a really, really great tool. I'm just going to demonstrate it briefly. You can click anywhere in an application and inspect the object that corresponds to this part of the application, which is pretty rad, I think. I don't know anything that even comes closely to this. So we got this object, and there's our graph. There are all these connections are inside this graph object. I can inspect it in whatever way I like. Where's the subpatches? Right. There are also the subpatches of the root node. So there's this gradient, the image loader, the billboard, and so on. You can poke around, and if you like to break stuff, you just search for the dialog method, click it, boom. Yes, you can actually call methods of the running program with the fscript browser, but never click on dialog. It will always crash because, yeah, that's what it does. It deallocates. For example, I'm going to use the NS window here, which is the basic window class for all Mac OS Windows, and call everybody's favorite method, which is, of course, called setAlphaValue. Boom, we have a transparent Quartz Composer window. Isn't this pretty? But this is just one example of what you can do with fscript anywhere. You can really influence the application in whatever way you like in real time, and there's also, it's connected to the fscript scripting language, and you can enter arbitrarily complex expressions, not impressions. And yeah, fscript anywhere is really cool. However, I wanted to talk about cycles. So I poked around a bit with fscript anywhere and a debugger, and I found this interesting method called canConnectPort to port. Well, let's try overriding that. This is the shortest patch I ever wrote, and it just returns true if the first port is not equal to the second port, which is a bit brute force. So you have to really know what you're doing if you use this thing, which is the reason why I called this thing magic container hands-off, okay? Because, for example, let's just use a multiplexer in verse 1. Since these ports are not equal, we can connect two output ports to one another. Nothing will happen, but this is, of course, silly. However, the practical part is you can now connect output ports to input ports in whatever way you like, which enables you to create arbitrary cycles. Sometimes this breaks down. You have to wiggle it a bit, but it successfully ran in the live show and never crashed. But I had this bit uneasy feeling about using undocumented features, overriding a sensible limitation of Quartz Composer and just fucking it all up. But yeah, nothing bad happened because of that thing. Oh, I'm running almost out of time, so I think that's the part where I stop showing what you can in principle do with Quartz Composers and go over to some examples. What was this? I don't think I have to save this. Just a minute. I'm going to run into one annoyance here. Right. Let's start with the iterator. If you want to do a lot of stuff, you don't really like to connect or create 10 by 10 cubes by hand. This is what I initially did with Quartz Composer, which was pretty stupid. There's an iterator patch. You just tell it how many iterations it does, and it's gonna do whatever it does inside itself. For example, now here for 10 times, and you can also nest it. So there's an iterator inside an iterator, and I derive the x and y position from the iterator variables. These are the outer iterators variables. These are the inner iterators variables. So I just create some connections, calculate the position, and use LFOs for what? I don't know. Oh yes, the cubes are not rotating in an equal way, so I use the iterator index to also shift the phase of the rotation a bit, so the cubes are not going to look equally, but instead be influenced by the current position in the current X and Y position. So this is the reason why the phase is grayed out, because it's connected to something else. So you cannot change what is already connected to some other port. Let's pimp this a little. I'm gonna make the time base, as I already said, recursively external. Now the time base is external and nothing is happening anymore, because I would have to change the patch time here. This is the part where I run out of space with one monitor. Let's try it like this. So I can now review my animation in slow motion or whatever I want to like, or whatever I want to do. And this also is, of course, possible to connect it to some MIDI controller or stuff like this, but I'm not going to do it right now because I don't have time. What else is there? Some MIDI stuff here. Right. Here I did some cheap fake motion blur, and you will see it's the motion blur is influenced by the actual speed of the cube. So the fake is just I have some I draw the same cube several times, just with a different alpha value and a different time offset. So the time comes basically from the MIDI keyboard, is being calculated, I think, with JavaScript, right? There is some increment of the object time, and I'm gonna limit to 0, so it does not become negative, and just gonna add whatever the value of the pitch wheel here is to the current time. And as you can see, I use this object initialize pattern here because in this instance it does not cause any trouble, but if it gets complicated, it will. And I have not really found out when or why or stuff, but remember what I said earlier, just if things break, do something like make it dependent on the patch time. And the MIDI controller's value is also being used to decide the offset of the after images. It's just connected. These splitters are just that they don't have any logic inside. They split a value, so you can easily change what's going in. Otherwise, if I want to change this and had connected it to 10 other nodes, I would have to make 10 new connections. So I just use a splitter and save myself some time. And the after image, as I said, is influenced by the MIDI value. This doesn't work because the viewer window is closed. But yeah, this is also nice. You can just inspect stuff with mouse over. Yeah. So much for that. The annoyance I mentioned earlier is I'm going to use camera input in the next presentation or composition. And because it's also running in a Finder window as a preview, this will not work, but it will now because I disabled the preview in Finder, because only one application can read from the camera at the same time. Yes. This, if I hold down one key, will calculate a difference image, and whatever changes in the room will just light up and be accumulated. Yes, pretty. You can see it lighting up all by itself. This is just the camera noise. And I'm using right, it's not accumulating right now, a so-called accumulator, which just keeps adding pixels onto one another. This is one of the few nodes where it's allowed by default to create loops. So I just use the current difference image, the difference between the current frame and the last frame, and add it to what's already in there, and accumulate it if the cursor up key is being held down. Otherwise I don't. And if I hold down the cursor down key, I'm just gonna override it with a black image, which is a constant color node here. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this composition. Right. The last thing I wanted to show you is something I did, which also uses some OpenGL shaders. Yes. I'm gonna have to scream a bit now into the internal microphone of the laptop, so If you don't like your TV, you can scream at it. And of course, I could also use a video file instead of camera input, but this is, yeah. Oh, I actually accidentally touched some key. What's going on behind the scenes here is, I have to find it. Side note. There is a render in image patch, which is useful because you can put stuff in a texture basically, or like Quartz Composer tends to call it an image, but it's dog slow, and I assume it does not use current OpenGL extensions. So if anybody feels like replacing that, do it and let me know. I will be very happy. This is my shader, which is probably not the most intelligent way to write shaders because I could probably have used some vector notation here. However, I just get the intensity of the current volume and do some shifting and some tearing apart of the color channels based on the volume, which comes in here from the audio input to this intensity node. Yeah, some things that I mentioned in the last two compositions, you can use audio input and also use keyboard input, where you can just assign arbitrary keys. You're not limited to the cursor keys, you just add a new one and get an event if you press or release that key. So this is also very useful if you want to make some do some live reaching. I usually use the MIDI keyboard for stuff that needs pressure sensitivity or controlling some stuff, and for Boolean triggers I just use the keyboard, switch this layer on and this layer off, and so on. And I think I'm actually so much out of time that this bar has looped. So I'm gonna finish and have time for questions. Was war? Microphone approaching. Spannung, Spannung.
What about the
It's not working. Es funktioniert nicht. Ist an.
What about the preview function for the nodes? Mouse over and see the images and everything.
Right. You can not only see the values of stuff, but also images. If I switch the thing back on, you just mouse over there, and you see the current output image. But you also see this is infinite and needs cropping, which means you have to use a crop patch. It's supplied in Quartz Composer, but it's retarded because there is no button where you can say just use sensible crop values. So you always have to, for example, if you have an image and use some core image filter on the image will suddenly have infinite dimensions. And you need to crop it to its very same size. And so this means you have to use an image dimensions patch and connect the pixels width and height to the cropping patch. And it's annoying, but I suppose there's not really a way around it.
You mentioned private patches. How
right.
do I enable them?
I think the fastest way is search around the internet. I've forgotten the URL, but there is some command line command which starts with defaults right. Maybe it's still in my history, but I don't really count on it. No, it's not. macOS has this central defaults repository, and it's just like something like default space right space QC enable hidden patches true, something like this. You will be able to find it using the Google.
Another one. Do you have a source for a core image kernel? It's how to do them. Example site, or
core image kernels.
Documentation.
Core image kernels basically use the OpenGL shader language, so you can refer to any OpenGL shader tutorial. There are some extensions Apple uses which are covered in Apple's core image kernel documentation, I think. And you probably will be able to find some on quartzcompositions.com, which is a pretty nice resource where you can download compositions other people have made and read discussions and stuff like this. I highly recommend that site for anyone doing stuff with Quartz Composer.
Am I right then you can't just put stuff on a timeline? You have to check what is now and can't just put it one behind the other?
Right.
This sucks.
Yes. Yes, timeline-based animation really sucks in Quartz Composer. This is, oh, I forgot I wanted to compare it to Flash. Right. Flash excels in this part, and it's really, really very time-consuming to do complex animations in Quartz Composer. I alleviated this a bit by creating a, what's it called, a busy spline patch. So you can have points and interpolate between them and have some splines. And I also have a spline editor for this. But basically, it's very annoying to do complex animations in Quartz Composer. I would recommend doing them in another application, either rendering them and just viewing that as an animation in Quartz Composer, or think of some output format which you read in Quartz Composer and just parse it and stuff like this. We did this with, I think, After Effects. We exported, we used a tracker in After Effects to track some object and exported the tracker positions from After Effects to Quartz Composer. This is core animation. Okay, DK recommends core animation. I never took a look at that, but right, new in Leopard.
Does it support other input devices than the DV? Because on the DV you have a big lag, as we have seen.
I'm afraid it doesn't. But
it does not do the USB tuner cards or something like this?
No, you can only use...
It's make it a bit useless for the live processing.
For what?
Live processing.
Actually, the lag is not so bad. It's just that I am using complex filter chains. If you could change, for example, the processing resolution or something like this. Oh, that you can do that. You can put you can use image dimension. You can enter image dimensions here, and it's probably going to be faster. And highest quality is a very obscure setting. In reality, this means deinterlace.
Okay. And does it support free frame?
Say again?
Does it support free frame plugins? Is there some kind of way?
I'm pretty sure it does not, but you could write a patch that loads.
Because the free frame plugins base is quite huge right now. So I'm just asking.
No, actually, all this plugin writing and developing it yourself is at the moment not endorsed by Apple, and you have to search your way around the internet and find some hints how to do this and stuff. But we took an early look at Leopard, and there are some Quartz Composer headers you can use to develop your own plugins. However, they're not nearly as extensive as the one created by ClassDump. So it's probably going to be reverse engineering all over again in 10.5. Also, all our stuff does not currently work in Leopard, so there's probably going to be some porting. But I don't expect radical changes. They'll probably change the method name or two. Davon war noch eine Frage.
Is there a way to render geometry that is not a cube or a billboard without doing stuff you're not supposed to do?
No.
No.
Say again? Right, there is a import patch that loads 3D Studio files I mentioned earlier, but I heard that it does not work anymore. So yes, by default you can render cubes and teapots in Quartz Composer. Everybody loves teapots. Any other questions? Right, then thank you for attending, and I hope you liked it.